Tonight we are going to be working in watercolor and going over that for detail with colored pencil. I am working on Arches Hot Press 140-pound watercolor paper. I've got this taped to my board with a acid-free pH neutral masking tape. I've got my water over here. I've got two different distilled waters, one for rinsing the brush and one for loading the brush. Now for acrylic painting, we don't worry about that. Your paint can be, or if you're rinsing your water brush water, I can't talk, could be mud and it'll still be fine for acrylics. For watercolor, totally different. You want to load your brush with clean water. I'm also using distilled water, which I don't use with acrylics. It doesn't really hurt anything. But there's so many chemicals and such in our normal tap water. You don't know what's going to cause something to yellow or behave weirdly, so it's just use distilled water, keep it safe. Obviously, you can see these are pretty tiny. You don't need a ton of water. So those big, I just get the big gallons like at Target, distilled water. I keep one by my easel. Super easy. And two little of these Bell Mason jars. Now we're going to start with blue. I may mix in a little bit of a brown to kind of muddy it up on some of the areas, and I'm probably not going to go quite as dark as my reference photo is. Now this reference photo, if you'd like to paint along with me, over at my website, link is in the video description to that specific photo. That is really blue. I'm just going to load some of that on my brush. Now, actually, I take that back. Let's remember what in the world I'm doing. I'm going to get this wet anywhere where I'm going to paint this first. So I'm going to go around this quickly. This is going to give me really smooth blending. This is so much better if you can do it while you're working, while your paper is flat, because see how mine's dripping? I don't work flat because of my back. But on something like this being smaller, I probably, if I was set up for it tonight, I would, but I'm not. But if you can work flat, you're not going to have the issue I am of paint running or water running. So I want to go quickly because I want this to stay wet. I'm going to just bring this water over to my easel. By getting it wet and not the subject, it's going to help the paint to stay where I want it on the background versus going all over the flowers. And if it goes over the flowers, no big deal. I'm going over that with watercolor or with colored pencil later anyway. So even if I get color where I really don't want it, it's so easy to fix when you're using colored pencil on top. The colored pencil is opaque enough to really cover things well. So I really like that when working with watercolor. If you are newer to watercolor, you have a harder time controlling it, planning on doing it with colored pencil on top. Colored pencil is so much more forgiving. It really is, it makes it less scary, much less daunting when you do that, when you know you can fix anything with your colored pencils later. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and start filling that in. Oh, that is a really pretty bright blue. I love it. Now my mat is going to cover, it's going to actually chop off part here, so I don't need, I'm not super worried about the edges, but I want to make sure that my painting is bigger than what my mat is going to be, so none of the white paper shows where I don't want it to. Now, I drew my subject out with a 2H graphite pencil. Now, it's not the water-soluble one, and the thing that you have to keep in mind, if you use one that is not water-soluble, the lines aren't going to erase. So if you want your lines to work out so you don't have pencil lines at the end, then you may want to consider using a water-soluble graphite. But the downside there, if you use it that's too dark, it could muddy up because it mixes in with your watercolor. There's pros and cons to everything. The con there is that that gray of the pencil may bleed in with your watercolors. So it just depends on what you're doing as to whether or not that's going to be a good idea for you. But anywhere along my edges, if they're not perfectly smooth, no big deal. I will fix it with colored pencil. Let me know. I've been thinking about doing a colored or a watercolor versus Inktense video. So let me know if that's something you guys are interested in. Doing the same subject with both mediums and talking about the difference between the two, how I tackle the two different mediums differently. Another fun video might be Inktense blocks versus Inktense pencils. Got all kinds of ideas. Now, I did not pre-stretch this paper. The arches, all of these watercolor papers will say that they're pre-stretched. Not really, I mean, sort of, not in any way that matters. So you can stretch them, and I did buy the auto stretchers, but I did not stretch this one because it's so small. I usually don't have a big problem with warping paper on something this size. I mean, it will warp to an extent, but not quite like I have experienced with bigger pieces. The bigger it is, it seems like the more likely I am to have major warping. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and dry that. Okay, I'm going to do one more layer on top of this. I'm going to let that cool for a second here. I'm going to do, so my plan is 2 layers for the background. So this is probably, this feels, so trick with watercolor, feel it after it dries. If it feels kind of cool to the touch, it's probably still wet. So areas may lift up and muddy a bit. I don't care if they muddy though, because of how I'm working, how I'm going to be layering this, it makes no difference to me. So I'm not worried about that. But if it feels cool to the touch, it's not all the way dry yet. And so that previous layer is more likely to like really reactivate. Okay, I'm gonna put, whoops, it's gonna get that wet first. I keep doing the same thing. Let's add some water. And I'm just gonna quickly throw that in there. Yeah, I can definitely see where it's not dry. It wasn't dry all the way because it's like way lifting more than it would if it was all the way dry. And you can't tell, like by looking at it, it looks dry. Touch it and you'll be able to feel that it's a bit cool still. That's how you know. Okay. So I'm going to put more of that same blue so I get a lot of that color saturation. And then areas where I want it to be lighter, I'm not going to put as much paint. Just let that water work with it. Seriously, painting flat with watercolor is so much easier. Like what I have happening where it kind of starts to run, those are issues that you can avoid pretty well by painting flat, like flat on a table. My neck and back give me the finger when I try to do that, so yeah. If it was a big project that like I was like putting tons and tons of work into, then I would probably, at least for the base layers, paint flat. My back and neck would have to deal with it. It was one of the reasons for so many years, though, that I was hesitant to even bother with watercolor, knowing that it works better flat. Detailing can be up at the easel, no problem, but when you're trying to get these bigger backgrounds in, that can be an issue. But then I realized, you know what, I'm just going to do it my way. It doesn't have to be exactly like other watercolors. I don't have to have the perfect technique to make something pretty. And I think we often do that when we're when we're painting. We choose not to do something thinking we have something holding us back, and it's like, you know what, do it your way then. Whatever that thing is that makes you think you can't do something, then change it, do it differently. I've heard people who were colorblind feel that they couldn't paint or draw. Yours may not look like mine, but that doesn't mean that what you come up with isn't going to be stunning. Different isn't a bad thing. Okay, I'm gonna pull a bit of brown. Now brown and blue, when you mix them together, you get more of a black color. And that's kind of what I want here, just this foggy, dark mixture in there. got too much water. See here how it's lifting? That is because my first layer was not really dry. It was sort of dry, but not completely. And I'm really wishing I was painting this flat right now, just to make my life easier. Want me to complain about that somewhere? I'm on a roll. Okay, and I'm just going to let that now. I'm going to soften this up together. So it just fades. We'll see how that looks dry. Another thing that you can do, I don't have it in here. I use my spray, my fine mist sprayer all the time with watercolor too. I want to smooth this out in here. My brush strokes were giving me a really weird texture that I wasn't wanting. So let's just wet that again. Just cleaning up those edges, because they're a mess. And see how messy this is? I don't even care, because I know I can fix everything with water, with colored pencil. That is such a big deal to me. Like, it just makes it so much more enjoyable because I can be so sloppy and still make it look really good. Okay, let's dry that. You know, see how I've got this harsh line there? I don't like that. I'm just going to reactivate that with my paintbrush and some water. I'm going to soften that out. I don't care if it's a little blotchy. I just don't like that it was a straight line. That's my issue. Now I have to be careful because I'm actually lifting some of this off. But I just want a softer transition there. Now, another thing we can do to give it a pretty cool texture, let me grab, do I have, yeah, a paper towel. There's my fine mist sprayer. I'm going to get this wet and I'm going to let a little bit of this lift. Let that set a second, and I'm going to pull some of this up, and this is going to give me some areas that are a little bit lighter. Just to get that pretty soft feel for that background. And the other thing I'm going to do is take my brush and soften some of this. These harsher edges are really over the petals. So I'm just going to let that pull into my flower petal now, because they need to be tinted with blue anyway, but I want to soften those edges so I'm not fighting that harsh line. So we'll just pull that a little bit where it was like really, really dark. Soften those out. This all gets cut off by the mat. Okay, I'm going to dry that again, and then we can start on the flower base layers and the ladybug. Actually, no, I'm missing a whole spot there. Okay, now something that may happen when you're painting, you're gonna have stuff happen that you're just like, wow, that did not go as planned. Work it into the design. Don't throw it away. Don't start over. Let's say I had a big blotch somewhere I didn't want. What if I throw bubbles in the background? That would be cool. That's something I throw in a lot of my stuff. I love the look of bubbles. You know, you've got a lot of options. Don't jump to, if something didn't go wrong, that it's ruined, and then toss it. Fill in these little spaces now. And then we had another one right up here. I see artists regularly get frustrated and want to throw things away. If your drawing is accurate, now let's say you're doing a portrait and you just drew it completely wrong, eyes are not, like that has to be accurate. But if your line drawing and everything was accurate, something, let's say a flower petal, you've painted over one on accident, great. Flower petals fall off all the time. leave it that way. Don't give up or start over every time some little thing goes wrong. Instead, figure out how to embrace that and work it into the piece. A little bit of brown there, darken that up. Okay. And we'll dry this. So now let's go ahead and start. I'm going to start with the stem to make it a little bit easier for me to judge the values. Let's get some of these darks in here because I have a feeling I'm going to go way too light on those flower petals, and they really are fairly dark. So greens. I don't know if you remember the last time I did one of these colored pencil watercolor combinations, I had commented that one of the brushes smelled bad. It wasn't the brush, it was the paint color. One of those brown tones smells terrible when wet. Found that out recently. Okay, let's start with this lighter green. It's very easy to make something darker, a lot harder to lighten it up, especially with watercolor. Now, again, I can fix a lot of this with colored pencil, but start light and add the darks as needed versus doing the other way around. Remember, when you want a color to be lighter, don't jump to, if you're coming from another medium, you may think, well, just add white. White will make it pastel, but it also isn't going to give you that translucent look of watercolors. Try to let the white of your paper show to get the lighter color. So just fill that in more solid. And I've got more of a yellowy tone. I'm going to pull some yellow ochre. I'm just letting that blend right in with the green that's there. Now I have filled in green where my flower is going to go, my petal. Let's wipe some of that off. Well, yeah, it will get covered later. Let's make it easier on myself and not have a harsh line to try to fight. Much better. See, it's a very forgiving medium. I think in some ways, watercolor gets a bad rap for being so difficult. Hold on. It's actually fairly forgiving the way you can lift stuff that goes wrong. Like the tape, apparently. Oh, the tape is lifting all over. Push that back down. Didn't realize that was coming up. Okay. Now, let's see, we've got some more of the yellow. This yellow has more of an orangey tint to it, so I'm still using that yellow oxide, or yellow ochre, and mix some orange in with it though. And it just peeks in a few areas between the petals, a little bit over the greens. Okay, and I missed a spot of green. It really should come up here more. I'm going to dry that so it doesn't smudge into my white as much. Now, why did I dry it? Because it can reactivate when I put the white in. Yes, but it's not going to reactivate as much if it's drier. The more dry it is, the more it stays put. But if it's dry to the touch, but not really dry, like if you feel it and it's still cool, that's going to be more likely to smudge into your next color when you're blending the area next to it. If it smudges, it's actually not a big deal, especially white. It's reflective. I don't care if it gets smudged. I will probably pull orange into mine anyway. But that's why that happens, or one of the things that you can do to avoid making a horrible mess. Make sure that previous area is more dry. Mine's questionable. Mine may be smudging here. So now we're getting into some of these petals. So a lot of this, I'm going to leave the white. Some of these need to be even more white than what I've already pulled more blue. No big deal. I'll go over that with the white colored pencil. But I'm going to use the same blue that I used in the background. Actually, hold on. My color, I just made a muddy mess. So this color, I don't know if you can, where's the palette? This color smudged into my blue and it made it a bit muddy. So I'm going to just wipe that area off. Just take a wet paper towel. make a clean area so I don't make a muddy mess. I mean, mud's okay to an extent, but in that case, it wasn't really what I was going for. So I'm just gonna wipe this. I also have a really cool little palette, little porcelain palette here. These are wonderful, but I don't need that color right now and I don't feel like wiping it out. I should probably get some more of those. They're really nice to work on. Okay, so back to, let's load a little bit of blue. Now it's clean. There's nothing next to it for me to smudge into, so I'm getting a much cleaner look. Remember, with watercolor, the more water that you add, the more translucent that color is going to be. Like, that's a little on the too light side. I'm gonna have to come back and darken some of that up. So we'll just get a base on some of this. Let's add some more. This petal, whoops, more water. Too much. Abort mission. And now not enough. Got Goldilocks and the Three Bears going on over here. Too much, not enough. I'm going to let those colors bleed from that light to the dark. Just smudge those together so I get this really pretty transition. Now, if you do one petal at a time, you can do where you get it just that petal wet. And it makes it really easy to blend one at a time instead of jumping around too much. Again, I'll be going over a lot of this with the white. This over here. So let's see, this guy's going to be much darker. Now, if you're not using colored pencil, you're going to be a bit more careful and precise about what you're doing. It's because I know I'm going over this with colored pencil, I can kind of rush through because you're not going to see a lot of this. And some of these petals are not even in the right place. I don't care. Like, add an extra petal. It does not matter. Like, that's not something to fuss over. There are several things when I'm painting that I'm going to stress over. That's just not one of them. When it comes to flowers, close is close enough. A lot of the detailing I'm going to do is just going to be with white on top. Let's see. Let's lighten this up. I'm getting a little too crazy here. And when I say white on top, again, I mean colored pencil. Now I could go over it. I do have the opaque white paints, which is essentially gouache. I can go over it with if I did want to just stick with watercolor. Rinse that off and then let that bleed out. This is actually 2 petals, which I will separate later. Right now, it can just be 1. So there's 1, and then there's 1 down here. And if you're looking at this thinking, I thought it was a white flower. Yeah, this is our base. We want to get all that nice blue in there. And if you look at the reference photo, you'll see where there's a lot more of the orange. I'm going to pull some of that in. A lot of that warmer color is there because the background, the original photograph was a green background. So obviously that's going to be picking up different colors. With mine, white, it's reflective. It's going to pick up what the color is because I changed it to blue. That's why I'm pulling extra blue in mine. A lot of extra blue. Dry that. What brand of watercolor brushes am I using? Right now, this one is a silver black velvet round, the number 8. The one that I used earlier was a Mimic Creative Mark 1/2 inch filbert. Okay, now let's get around the ladybug. We had some detailing here. I'm going to do with the paint. I'm using some brown again. Oh, that paint, let me dry that. Too wet. Okay, these guys have this really neat outline. It's a really dark outline. So just lining through here. Again, I'm not making them exact to the photo. I'm just looking at one area and what's close, what's similar. So I just kind of pick one of those shapes and then paint it in. Is it exact? Heck no. It doesn't need to be. Like I said, if you're doing a portrait, a pet portrait, an animal, there are things that need to be exact. So you want to spend your time on those, not worrying so much over like, oh, I missed one of these little lines. That's not going to make a big difference in the end. You want to start separating or figuring out what in your work, where is close enough versus where does it need to be exact. Questions you want to ask yourself. Because I don't want you to feel like you should just get sloppy with everything you do. It just depends on what you're working on. Okay, let's now paint the base layer of the ladybug. The part I think most of us have been looking forward to the most. Which red do I want? More of an orangey red. Probably this one. Maybe with a little bit of orange. So actually I'm going to start with orange. I'm going to start with that. And then we'll add a little bit more with the red. I'm not going to worry about the black spots yet. I'm just going to worry about shading the ladybug. Now here, where I want it to be lighter, I'm going to rinse my brush and use more water. Let that be thinner. More opaque as we get out to the outer edges, but I want that to be light and look shiny, so let the white of your paper show through. Now I can reload the brush with thicker paint for these outer edges. And then I'm going to come on top with some different reds as well. Some darker red. This one is that more orange tone. Now, I'm actually getting a little bit of a muddy color because look at my water. Can you see how muddy that is? I need to dump this. Let me dry this so it doesn't dry all warped and weird. So what was happening is I was not paying attention and the brush to rinse a couple too many times. I went in the wrong container. So let me dump this and refill it real quick. Now, whenever I use regular tap water to rinse out these jars, I also dry them after to get the tap water back out before I refill it with the distilled water. I mean, if you let it dry, you're fine, but I want to make sure all of those nasty chemicals in our tap water are out of this before I refill it. Maybe I'm being a bit neurotic or too paranoid, entirely possible, but if I'm going through the effort of using distilled water, why risk mixing the two? Probably also my reef keeping experience is getting involved in this. Like I don't use tap water for anything with the reef, so that may be part of why I'm being a little bit too neurotic. Well, not rinse it, making sure that's clean. Okay, now I'm going to pull some of this red. This is more of a red. See, this time I rinsed it, I was smart. I used it in the dirty water for rinsing. Look at me doing my job right. It's a Christmas miracle. I'm gonna come down to a deeper burgundy type color. We're gonna pull this in right here. That is not wet enough. Actually, you know what? This color looks like that would be good mixed in with it really dark. And we're going to darken up this edge even more. And then we've got this little batch that kind of comes in. And then darker again here. And I'm going to rinse that. And I'm going to dry it. Well, it looks a little dull, no problem, because I have a little too white there. I'm actually going to lift some more. Let's lift a little bit of this. And then I'm going to go right over that. Let me dry it again. And back to the red, maybe a little bit of orange. A little bit more water in that. There we go. So his little head, I'm going to start with dark blue. I am not going to jump into, I could do blue. Let's throw a little bit of red in there too. I am not going to jump straight into black because if I do, I can't really go darker than that. So you can see I'm mixing these colors here. I want it dark. I just don't need it that dark. Get a little nubbin sticks out. It's got white here, so let's at least leave that in. One of the things that I like so much with watercolor is the tiny, tiny little detail you can get with it. So enjoyable. Little legs, and I apparently did not fill in enough of the background, so let's... Actually, I take it back. I was going to fill in the background. See this spot I missed here and here? I was going to do that with watercolor. I'm not going to get it smooth if I do. Instead, I'm going to do that with colored pencil. We'll leave it alone. Pretty sure I can color match that. Okay, let's get our little black dots. So we've got a bigger one over here. Now, same thing, actually, that one, I'm going to start with blue because this one's got a highlight on him. Now, part of that highlight I will really pick up with a colored pencil, but okay, now I can come on top with my black where I want the darker areas of his little head. So we've got a shadow here. We've got another dark area here. And then another one comes around here. And then he's got like a little... Give him a thicker thigh there. Same thing, he needs a thicker thigh. And then here, what else do we have? Little antenna guys sticking out over here. Okay. And we are ready for colored pencil. So that's all I'm going to do for the underpainting with watercolor. And it just saves so much time. And it's not that I don't enjoy doing straight colored pencil. Somebody left a comment recently on a video saying they didn't feel that people should try to do a blurry painterly look with colored pencil. Why? It can do it just fine. It takes longer, but it's also really enjoyable. So use whatever method you want, but this is a nice way to really save some time on getting your base layers in. That would take me a very long time with colored pencil to get that level of color saturation. So let's go ahead, and while I put this away, we'll have our standard message from the boys. I really need to make a new ad, but you know, it's what we've got.
Without treats, these puppies are so sad. Your Patreon pledge of only $4 or more gives them cookies of happiness. Act now, and the bad cow gets a treat too. Oh, and you also get over 300 art lessons and a new one every single week, plus other rewards. Sign up at patreon.com/Lachri.
Now, if needed, you absolutely can use odorless mineral spirits on your colored pencil over your watercolor. The OMS will not affect or lift the watercolor. Hardly anything will budge. So those are very compatible. Now, you do want to make sure anything you're going to do with watercolor, that needs to be done before you start with colored pencil. Once I start putting colored pencil on here, watercolor's not going to stick anymore. You're putting a water-based product then on top of an oil or wax base. That won't work. You want to do the reverse. That's why we did our water-based product first. Now we can put the oil and wax-based pencils on top of that. So what would happen, and it's something you could actually do as a kind of neat technique. Let's say I had something I wanted to stay super white. I could have taken my white watercolor pencil, or not watercolor, colored pencil, and put that on, and it's going to keep that paper pretty white. It like seals it almost. It kind of protects it. So it actually, do I have anything? I can show you. Let me do a quick little sample of what would happen. It will stain it some, but not to the same extent because it doesn't really stick. See how you can still see where I wrote? So that is something that you can do to protect the white of certain areas, but it does stain it. But see how it doesn't really stick the same. It doesn't soak in the same as what you would get with just the white of the paper. So that is what would happen. But the other thing is those areas aren't really archival. So let's say, well, great, now it's a light blue. It's not really permanently going to stick there that well. So it's something you normally want to avoid. But in this case, let's say I was trying to keep one of those white petals super light, and it will not, like, watch what happens when it dries. It's just on there. It's stained. Whether or not that's going to be permanent, hit or miss. So anyway, kind of a little trick there. But that's why we're not going on top of this too. So I'm just going to first start out by cleaning up that edge where I didn't fill in enough. I'm going to keep this blue pencil out because that looks good. And I've got some glassine if I need to rest my hand while I draw. We'll start with that section. The reason that I use glassine is, one, nothing's going to stick to it. So let's say what is this doing? There we go. Let's say I got accidentally a little bit of colored pencil under this. It's not going to stick to it and like smudge as I move this around, whereas a regular piece of paper will or can. Ask me how I know. It's not a pleasant experience. But something like tracing paper, any paper is better than nothing. You don't want to rest your hand on the paper because people juices, the oils from your skin, not archival. So we want to keep that off the work as much as possible. And white. I'm just going to start with one of the petals. Now the two pencils, my go-to pencils for this will be the Derwent Lightfast white and the Derwent Drawing Chinese white. They're my two more opaque pencils. If I've got my going over that. Oh, look how pretty and soft that edge is now. I do want to flatten this out though. This is kind of a hot mess up here. And I'm just going to clean that up, and I will blend that right into my background. I am going to use a little bit of OMS right there though to smooth that out. And you'll see what I mean. This really doesn't affect. See how I'm wiping it right over the watercolor? Look how it doesn't lift it. It doesn't do anything. This is just odorless mineral spirits to smooth it. It's a little darker, but it'll dry light again. And I might go over that with a lighter polychromos. We'll see when that dries. But it doesn't, see what I mean by it doesn't move, it doesn't affect. If I had done that with water, it would just it would have lifted a lot by scrubbing the way I did. Didn't do anything. So, or like it didn't do anything negative, I mean. It blended the pencil without making a mess. Let's see, this guy's more outlined. He's pretty dark, a lot darker than what I've got. So I'm going to take that same pencil since the color is so similar. Let's darken up this petal. And this guy, I need to leave this alone because this paper is wet. I need to let that dry all the way before I go back over. I've got to do a little bit of touch up there on correcting where these petals go. This guy comes this way, and then this is a very light white one. So I'm pushing pretty hard, really burnishing that to get that bright. And look how bright that gets. So let's come down here. Well, that one's actually probably dry enough. I can probably, yep. And then this one, we're going to get a little bit more detailing in here. It's really bright right along that edge. And then we need that pencil. This is the Polychromos Middle Phthalo Blue. Let me sharpen that. So we've got a little bit more detail, a little streaky here. More of a shadow right under the ladybug. Now see where I just took the pencil and I went right over his leg? Well, now his leg doesn't stand out. No worries, I'm just gonna go over that with black later. Black or nightshade would also work. So we come over here. I'm going to clean this up by pushing a little bit harder along this petal. Because this one's darker, it's going to make that look even whiter. Cleaning up that edge. Looks like I added an extra petal in here at some point, so whatever. Bonus petal. It's one of the reasons I often start people, like if somebody comes to me and they want to start learning portraits, I generally will start them with roses, even though portraits is their goal. Because if you miss a petal, it's not discouraging, it's no big deal, it's still pretty, and you're still getting the hang of like how to blend whatever medium you're working in, your values, all of that, getting something to look curved and rounded and three-dimensional. If I miss a nose on a person, obviously it's a bigger issue than a petal on a flower. And usually I'll do a couple of roses and then go ahead and start them on portraits, but just to let them get the hang of whatever medium that they're going for. It's not that I want to keep them on roses for the next 2 years or anything like that. We're going to jump into the portraits pretty soon, just not the first thing. Pull that one out a little longer. Now this is coming out a little bit grainy and gritty. I'll just go right over that with my OMS. Smooth it right out. And like here, this corner should have more of the background, so we'll just pull into that. And now you can really see what I'm talking about with it. It's so easy to clean stuff up when we start with the colored pencil. That's why I'm not going to spend too much time perfecting everything with the watercolor. Pushing really hard there where I want that to be nice and white. Maybe a little bit more light on the edge there. This one had 2 petals, that one and the one behind it. A few more details in there. This one actually curved in a bit, so we can correct that. And a few more shadows with the lines. I don't have to push terribly hard with a blue one. Okay, I'm going to pull a little bit of orange, or maybe a peach. That should work. This color is medium flesh. Makes me think of zombies. Just a little bit in here. I'm going to switch over to a yellow. Do a little shading on these guys. These little details are just so, I love this stage. It's so fun. And it sticks so well. So with ink tints, I don't love as much the combination of colored pencil with ink tints. It doesn't stick as well. I usually just do ink tints by itself between the pencils and the blocks. But the colored pencil, oh my gosh, it sticks so well to watercolor. I'm going to blend out a little bit of this. Soften some of my white, and it's going to look darker, but it'll dry back opaque again. So you get, it just, I love how it does not move the watercolor at all. Okay, while that dries, I do want to do a little bit more in here, but I'm going to go ahead and come over to this Ladybug. I'm just going to go back over his little legs. I'm also going to use a polychromos white. Do I have one out? So I want to get a little bit of a highlight, but I don't want it so opaque like what the Luminance, or either the Luminance, the Derwent Drawing, or the Derwent Light Fast. They're too opaque for this highlight. I just want to lighten it a bit. So that's why I'm switching over to my polychromos, because it's more translucent. I can still really see what's under it. So you want to get that highlight there. Oops, pushed a little too hard for how sharp I had that. And then the highlight over his head. Notice that the highlight goes over the black part of that black spot too. So that gives you that more shiny look. And the same thing with his head here. We've got that highlight right in this area with the dark around it. If we would have just done the whole thing solid black, you lose that shine, you lose the three-dimensional look. Grab a couple of greens. Let's go with a darker green now. This one is moss green. And this will also really work for tinting some of this color. Just so it's not quite so flat. And a lot of this would be a lot darker anyway. A little bit of highlights. I'm going to use that same polychromos white just to pull a few out. Whoops, dropping my pencils. And let's use a bit of OMS, smooth some of that out. I get a little bit more with the polychromos white for some line details in here. And I'm burnishing. I'm like pushing hard with this. But I do want to tone this one. It's just standing out a little too much. Just a little bit of blue on there. Even though it is that light on the reference photo, it's just drawing too much of my attention to it, more than what I want it to. So this is where, as an artist, you have to come through and go, okay, well, what will make mine look better? I want it bright, just not that bright. So cute. I love how this guy came out. So one of the things I want to do on the edges, they look a little too perfectly outlined. I'm going to pull a little bit of that blue, let those sketchy details go right in. So it gives you a better transition. Going around the edge with something a little bit more opaque here. Let me pull a little bit of brown. These ones. I'm just going to dot, especially closer to the greens. Let's darken this up. There we go. And that is it for this guy. He is all done. Let me pull him over here so you can see better. And I do need to sign him, and I'll show you how he'll sit in the mat. So this gives you a better representation of the color and the details there. Oh, I like him. He's cute. Now, whenever you sign your work, if you're going with something that's a standard size like this, you need to account for the mat, the actual screen. So I'm going to position that mat where I want him. There we go. That is how I wanted him positioned. So it really puts the ladybug in that bottom lower third. So if we went by the rule of thirds, that ladybug is hitting that nice spot. So now you can see, if I would have signed all the way at the bottom, this is a mistake a lot of people make. They just think, okay, sign it at the bottom edge. What's your standard mat size? If you did this to be a standard, which I did, to be a 5x7, I just painted in around the edges so that I don't have to worry about like white showing where I didn't want it to show. But if that signature was down here, you're going to completely cover it with the mat. So by holding that mat there, that gives you a much better idea of where to sign it. And the nice thing in this case, the thing I like about the white or the black mat is it pulls out the ladybug. It makes him stand out more and the flower not as much. Now, if you use a white mat, I can actually show you the difference. It's pretty interesting. It'll bring out a different look completely. So what I usually recommend artists do when they're matting their work, or if you buy artwork, take it with you and try on a few different matte colors, because white looks totally different than what black would look like. I feel like here, and one of the things with white mattes that I don't like, I feel like you notice the matte too much, but the black, it really keeps your attention within that piece and focused more on the ladybug because the black in the ladybug is pulled out with it. So there you go. That is the finished piece.
Hey, you. Yes, you. I see all your unused art supplies over there. Oh my God, those brushes aren't even opened yet. Tragic. You keep buying new fancy materials, but you don't use them because you don't want to waste them. Stop making your art supplies sad. Sign up for art lessons for as little as $4 a month. There are over 300 painting and drawing lessons available when you sign up, and new ones every week. Patreon.com/Lachri.